start trading amongst themselves and inflate the value so terribly that the people on the ground can no longer afford the food.
Correct. And the same thing's happening with water. I mean, there are literally water systems where there's fountains coming in and water treatment plants. Right next door is a village that has to walk miles. And literally they look up, seeing the water coming out, the purified water fountaining above them. They can't get any of it. They have to walk for miles. Exactly. I wrote an article a while ago called The Ghosts of the Caribbean. And I wrote it because when about 10 years ago, I went to the Caribbean on a cruise. And to cut a long story short, I decided once we landed on this island to bridge the perimeter. There's like a perimeter where it just nobody seems to go because all the pubs and all the trinket shops are all located there. No one goes there. So I'll stuff this. I'm going to go for a walk. So I went for a walk. It's perfect weather. Middle of spring break. It is summer. It's just perfect. I mean, you couldn't imagine for anything like in terms of weather or temperature. House after house after house, beach house everywhere. The streets were completely empty. Completely empty. And there was no one living there. There was no one around. There was no one on the beach. You know that song, There's No One on the Beach? What is it? Nobody on the road, nobody on the beach. You remember that song, The Boys of Summer? That's what it felt like. There was no one there. It was like this chilling feeling. And then you start to realize that what's probably happening is these are all timeshare things that have been sold and resold and split up. And because they've got outside investors putting money into it, they don't want to touch the original asset. No one ever visits them because they didn't buy it for the thing. They bought it for the increase in value that it could return, that it could bring. And this is what's starting to happen. And you've got all this poverty-stricken place and all these beach houses standing completely empty. Same kind of concept, I think, is what you're saying. Where it's man-made famines, it's man-made shortages. Yeah?
I think what you're pointing out, maybe the same message that's coming through is the corruption in the system. The corruptions in the financial system. I think that's certainly what my interest is that sure, we need a system. But how corrupt is that system? So let's just go back to the mortgage system or security system of any kind of debt system. Sold into debt, for example, let's say there's a million rand a month payment, for example, for a mortgage. I mean, which would then get discounted, which is over a 240-month period with 240 million. So technically what that represents today, if you net present value that debt, that's 883 million, okay? So today's present value of that debt is 83 million. The bank then sells that for roughly double that value. So when it takes those mortgages from you, piles them together, gets an income stream of R1 million a month, but would then sell it for double 83 million. Okay, so 166 million, the bank would then credit into its account and it would then be sold to one of your SPVs that you talk about. Okay, the SPV now owns that debt. Now default on your promise, and what the bank would then do, when you default, by the way, it's already insured. So the SPV has already been paid out. The banks receive this money, 160 million, 100% profit of what you paid. You promised to pay for 240 months. When you default, the SPV is already paid out. So everyone's been settled. The bank doesn't stop there. There's endemic greed. Now it wants your asset, which you pledged, which is your house. When that now come collect all those houses and bring them back on that. When there's a shortfall in what you agreed as the debt that you owed, which you talked about earlier, the certificate of balance and the agreement of debt that you've actually defaulted the amount that you owe, they'll come collect the difference on that. So this bank has now been enriched 4 times.
Thank you for putting it so eloquently. There you go. I mean, the point is they just can't they've got to stop taking away assets, I think, at the end of the day, on this kind of scheme. So, yeah, thanks, guys. Just to carry on, because I know we also need to get to lunch. Just the third time, there's on the account application used by Mercantile Bank, it even says, when you sign it, we authorize you, the bank, to pay all promissory notes, bills of exchange, and other negotiable instruments drawn, made and accepted by me. And, by the way, to debit the amount of such instruments to my or our foresaid account. So you start to look at what these are actually meaning in terms of what's getting paid and what's not. But the point is that negotiable instruments are very real, and a study of them is necessary. And I can tell you right now that there are very, very few lawyers, very few even judges, very few anyone in the legal system and banking system that even know that the Bills of Exchange Act even exists. Most lawyers only covered it for a very brief period of time, and it was done at 7 o'clock in the morning when everyone was hungover. They hardly studied it. Seriously, go check that out for yourself. In terms of the way in which banks... We're forgetting how banks work. Maybe we knew some time ago, or maybe it's always kept secret. We're forgetting how the money system works. And I think we need to start changing that, because if we're going to have any hope in getting something that's going to replace it, we need to know. Professor Antal, how do you pronounce his surname? Institute of Science and Applied Mathematics wrote an article, Detractors of Adam Smith's Real Bills Doctrine, stated this: debt repayable in irredeemable currency. Remember, irredeemable currency is currency not backed by anything physical, no gold or silver. Remember, an irredeemable promise is a promise that can never be redeemed. That's what our money is. Debt repayable in irredeemable currency is nothing but an interest-bearing promise to pay that is exchangeable at maturity for a non-interest-bearing one. But debt can never be retired under the regime of irredeemable currency. At maturity, it is shifted from one debtor to another. People are constructing a debt tower of Babel destined to topple in the fullness of time. Only if we approach our differences with sufficient humility can we prevail against the evil forces opposing freedom, armed as they were with the formidable weapon of irredeemable currency. There it is, a weapon of mass destruction. Now this is a applied professor of mathematics. Intermountain Institute of Science and Applied Mathematics. The reason why I bring this up, because it's not internet crap. It's really important that the stuff is, we're digging deep now, right into the heart of what's going on. And finally, people are starting to actually start talking about this. And on that note, on foreclosures, banks are foreclosing on people's homes and assets by using the contract as a shield. Their argument is simple. You signed a contract, so you must pay. Now that is an old-fashioned approach, which is legitimate in many ways. It's a very old-fashioned approach. It says if you have a debt, you must pay it. Okay. Now, there's nothing not true about that. But now as we're learning, is it really a debt? What are we repaying it? How are we repaying it? There's much more to that now. We have to take the same principles that it comes with and start to apply new thinking. Banks are foreclosing on people's homes and assets by using the contract as a shield. The argument is simple. You signed a contract, so you must pay. By sticking to the age-old axiom, the agreement is king, anyone attempting to look behind the shield is prohibited from doing so. The loan agreement, which is a series of one-way payments from the customer with absolutely no downside whatsoever to the bank, is somehow enough to allow them to win in court. We believe that granting summary judgment in such a manner, without the courts even listening to the counter-argument that the contract itself is not valid due to malicious deception, is unconstitutional. Listen to the argument. That's what we're saying. Get a judge to listen to this and actually say, these are the problems that I have with this argument. This is why it's not true. Listen to the argument. That's all we're asking. Yet it's a hot potato. Nobody wants to touch this stuff. Nobody wants to touch this information. Everybody's terrified, absolutely terrified in the system, because they know that the contagion in the system, it's like a virus, it's going to spread. So what do we do? Do we just carry on doing nothing? Yeah?
What they call SLA agreements with attorneys, service level agreements, where the attorneys are technically allowed to act against the bank. Okay, so we'll give you our mortgage registrations if you don't act against us. But in any of these cases, if one just makes a simple structure, so if you're suing, say, for a home loan or whatever, say the bank say, fine, I'll pay the home loan, here's the money. But I'd like you to release my security first and give me back the title deeds to the property. So I'll pay you the minute you give the title deeds back. They can't accept those settlements, and they won't. For the simple reason they securitize the debt.
Yeah. That's the point. You can't even pay.
So the court will actually set your tender to pay. Guarantee shortly after that you'll have a liquidation application. Guarantee.
The reason the banks still, or even their studies do not want to even entertain the discussion is because it will open up the floodgates to their liability. And that's something that they simply shudder away from forever. But I think
fact, they're acting what's called contra mores bonis, which basically means in bad faith. Okay, because you cannot hold an asset and at the same time receive payment for it.
Yeah.
So all we're saying to him is exchange the asset for me, give me the asset, and I'll give you the payment. They won't do it. They can't do it because the legal system is in the banks, and the discounted system doesn't allow them to do it.
That's right.
That's the problem.
In fact, there is an interesting argument that if you have a look at how was your loan originally agreed, if you go back to when you took out a loan for any asset, what actually happens is that in order for you to buy a house, it needs to be paid for. It's got to be non-encumbered, it's called. You've got to make sure it's got no liens and anything attached to it. Which means all those liens and stuff have to be paid off before it can be transferred into your name. Who pays that? Can't be you, surely, because you haven't got the loan yet. Why haven't you got the loan? Because you need the asset to secure the loan, supposedly. So how can you have the property transferred into your name, okay, then you use that property as a security? You can't get the loan because you don't have the property as security, but it can't be transferred because it's got to be unencumbered. The only way that can work, in my mind, is if the whole thing is already paid up front. And it's the split, the atom argument again. It's already been paid. It's sorted out, it's done. Oh, by the way, we have a completely separate agreement with regards to a string of repayments that go every month. Remember, the word repay doesn't mean to pay back something. It just means to repay. Repay, pay, over and over again and pay. Just repaying. You're not repaying something, you give it to me so I will repay it. That's our silly English language that we use on the street, which has been twisted a little bit. Their definition of repay is very different to our definition of repay. Whew, we're getting ripped.
Don't you think the glue that's holding this whole system together are the top legal firms in this country?
Yes.
Yeah.
Judges.
Yeah.
That's where you've got to start attacking. That's the disclosure you've got to attack. The liquidators, the top law firms that are protecting the system, because that's their bread and butter. Not just bread and butter, that's where their super profits lie.
Yeah. The lawyers are in a beautiful position because they're untouchable. Really, they can basically do what they want. Oh, we're just acting on our best. Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
That's you've taken away the bank's protection.
Just think about this. Have you noticed the law firms in Joburg, the big law firms in Joburg, their buildings overshadow the banks? That is not just a freak of nature. That's deliberately, it's in our face, telling us exactly what's going on.
Who used to own the biggest law firm in the country?
I don't know.
Nedbank.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Edward Nathan was sold to Nedbank for 400 million, and then the partners bought it back for 80 million. Not so long ago. And who was protecting who?
Yeah. No, there you go. I mean, I've been to court many, many times, and I've watched it. It is just, it's absolutely extraordinary. Okay, I'm going to finish off for lunch now on a note, because we need to look at how our politicians are dealing with this kind of stuff.
Senator Collins, thanks for coming in.
It's a great pleasure, thank you.
The ship that was involved in the incident off Western Australia this week.
Yeah, the one the front fell off?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not very typical. I'd like to make that point.
Well, how is it untypical?
Well, there are a lot of these ships going around the world all the time, and very seldom does anything like this happen. I just don't want people thinking that tankers aren't safe.
Was this tanker safe?
Well, I was thinking more about the other ones.
The ones that are safe?
Yeah, the ones the front doesn't fall off.
Well, if this wasn't safe, why did it have 80,000 tonnes of oil on it?
Well, I'm not saying it wasn't safe. It's just perhaps not quite as safe as some of the other ones.
Why?
Well, some of them are built so the front doesn't fall off at all.
Well, wasn't this built so the front wouldn't fall
Well,
off?
obviously not.
How do you know?
Well, because the front fell off and 20,000 tonnes of crude oil spilled into the sea caught fire. It's a bit of a giveaway. I'd just like to make the point that that is not normal.
Well, what sort of standards are these oil tankers built to?
Oh, very rigorous maritime engineering standards.
What sort of thing?
Well, the front's not supposed to fall off for a start.
And what other things?
Well, there are regulations governing the materials that they can be made of.
What materials?
Well, cardboard's out.
And?
No cardboard derivatives.
Like paper?
No paper. No string, no sellotape.
Rubber?
No, rubber's out. They've got to have a steering wheel. There's a minimum crew requirement.
What's the minimum crew?
Oh, one, I suppose.
So the allegations that they're just designed to carry as much oil as possible, what are the consequences? I mean, that's ludicrous.
Absolutely ludicrous. These are very, very strong vessels.
So what happened in this case?
Well, the front fell off in this case by all means, but it's very unusual.
But Senator Collins, why did the front book fall off?
Well, a wave hit it.
The wave hit it?
A wave hit the ship.
Is that unusual?
Oh, yeah. At sea, chance for millions.
So what do you do to protect the environment in cases like
The
this?
ship was towed outside the environment.
Into another environment?
No, it's been towed beyond the environment. It's not in the environment.
No, but from one environment to another environment.
No, it's beyond the environment. It's not in an environment. It has been towed beyond the environment.
Well, what's out there?
Nothing's out there.
Well, there must be something.
There is nothing out there. All there is sea and birds and fish.
And?
And 20,000 tonnes of crude oil.
And what else?
And a fire.
And anything else?
And the part of the ship that the front fell off. But there's nothing else out there.
Senator Collins, thanks for joining us.
Complete void.
Yeah, we're out of
The
time.
environment's perfectly sacred.
Everything the establishment has told you is wrong with you is actually what's right with you. You see things others don't. You are hardwired to change the world. Unlike 9 out of 10 people, your mind is irrepressible, and this threatens authority. You were born to be a revolutionary. You can't stand rules because in your heart you know there's a better way. You have strengths dangerous to the establishment, and it wants them eliminated. So your whole life you've been told your strengths were weaknesses. Now I'm telling you otherwise. Your impulsivity is a gift. Impulses are your key to the miraculous. Your distractibility is an artifact of your inspired creativity. Your mood swings reflect the natural pulse of life. They give you unstoppable energy when you're high, deep soulful insight when you're low. Been diagnosed with a disorder? That's society's latest way to deny its own illness by pointing the finger at you. Your addictive personality is just a symptom of your vast, underused capacity for heroic creative expression and spiritual connection. Your utter lack of repression, your wide-eyed idealism, your unmitigated open mind. Didn't anyone ever tell you? These are the traits shared by the greatest pioneers and visionaries, innovators, revolutionaries, procrastinators, and drama queens, activists on the social scene, space cadets, and mavericks, philosophers, and derelicts, business suits flying fighter jets, football stars and sex addicts, celebrities with ADD, alcoholics, booze-seeking novelty, first responders, prophets and saints, mystics, and change agents. We are all the same, you know, 'cause we're all affected by the way. We are all the same, you know, 'cause we're all attracted to the flame. You know in your heart there's a natural order, something more sovereign than any man-made rules or laws could ever express. And this natural order is called the way. The way is the eternal substrate of the cosmos. It guides the very current of time and space. The way is known by some as the will of God, divine providence, the Holy Spirit, the implicate order, the Tao, reverse entropy, life force. But for now, we'll simply call it the way. The way is reflected in you as the source of your inspiration, the source of your passions, your wisdom, your enthusiasm, your intuition, your spiritual fire, love. The way takes the chaos out of the universe and breathes life into it, giving it divine order. The way, when expressed by the mind, is genius. When perceived through the eyes, is beauty. When felt through the senses, is grace. When allowed into the heart, is love. Most people cannot sense the way directly, but then there are the wayseers, the keepers of the flame. Wayseers have an unexplainable knack for just knowing the way. They sense it in their very being. They can't tell you why or how they arrived at the right answer. They just know it in their core. They can't show their work, so don't ask. Their minds simply resonate with the way. When the way is present, so are they. While others are blind to it, and society begs you to ignore it, the way stirs you inside. Neurological repression blocks most people's awareness of the way, censoring all thoughts and impulses from the unconscious, is their prefrontal cortex, the Gestapo of the brain. Nothing which violates its socialized programming even gets through. But your mind is different. Your mind has been cracked wide open to the way by some miraculous genetic trait, some psychotropic chemical, or maybe even by the will of your own soul. Your brain's reward pathways have been hijacked, dopamine employed to overthrow the fascist dictatorship of your prefrontal cortex. Now your brain is free of repression, your mind free of censorship, your awareness exposed to the turbulent seas of the unconscious. Through this open doorway, divine light shines into your consciousness, showing you the way. This is what makes you a wayseer. 90% of human civilization is populated with those whose brains are blocked to the way. Their brains are hardwired to enforce the social programming indoctrinated since birth. Unlike you, they cannot break out of this programming because they have not yet experienced the necessary revolution of mind. These programmed people take social institutions and rules very seriously. Society is full of games programmed to keep people's minds occupied so they will not revolt. These games often cause sick fixations on peculiar protocols, power structures, taboos, and domination, all subtle forms of human bondage. This distinct form of madness is not only tolerated by the masses, but insisted upon. The programmed ones believe in rules so forcefully, they become willing to destroy anyone who violates them. Wayseers are the ones who call their bluff. Since wayseer minds are free to reject social programming, wayseers readily see these social institutions for what they are, imaginary games. Wayseers comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. Helping those who are lost in these games and refuse to help themselves is the calling of many wayseers. Since wayseers are the ones who keep contact with the original source of reality, they are able to disrupt societal conventions and even governments to realign humanity with the way. The wayseers are an ancient lineage, a kind of priesthood, carriers of the flame, ones in the know. There must always be wayseers to reform the dizzying, psychotic, spinning wheels of society, giant, mindless hamster wheels, obscuring the pure blue sky, keeping humanity shackled in a darkened cage. So wayseers are called to shed light on the madness of society, to continually resurrect the timeless, transcendent spirit of truth. Wayseers reveal this divine truth by devoting themselves to the birth of some creative or destructive act, expressed through art or philosophy, innovations in shake of industry, revolutions for democracy, coups that topple hypocrisy, movements of solidarity, changes that leave a legacy, rebellions against policy, spirit-infused technology, moments of clarity, things that challenge barbarity, watersheds of sincerity.
It's been designed to make you want to get all the rest of it. So the good news is I'll have all the stuff for you. Everything that you've seen little snippets of will all be made available to you. If you're with the way. You should imagine a few hundred years ago there's a village. And this village is very happy. Because in the morning, all the people from the village would go to the well in the middle of the village. And they'd go and collect their water. And for many, many years, generations, it worked perfectly. They would go to the well, take their water out. They'd always take just what they need. There was no point in taking any more. And they would use the water for themselves, and it just worked beautifully. Then one day, this group of bandits attacked the village. And they took over the well. And they put a big wall around it with security guards and everything. And from now on, you won't be able to take water unless you provided some of the fruits of your labor. You'd have to provide them with some kind of goods or services. You'd have to provide them with food or any valuables that you might have, services, whatever. And what was starting to happen is that people were starting to get a little bit annoyed. At first it seemed to be, okay, well, it's not too bad. But what would happen over time was that they were starting to demand less water, more products, labor, for less water. And then what happened was very interesting. You see, behind the wall, what these bandits did was actually dug the well even deeper. And they were actually tapping into more water. But instead of sharing this abundance with all the rest of the villagers, they did the opposite. You see, when summer would occur, normally, before the bandits came, what the people did was they merely took a little bit less than what they needed. But they still had enough, because they would share. So even in times of drought, when things weren't going too well, they always got together and they made a plan. Now these bandits came along, and even in times of drought, even though they had enough water, they would still maintain the illusion of scarcity. They would still maintain this illusion that there's not enough for everybody. And they would continue this going because they were building huge empires by simply having a commodity that everybody needed. And the last straw was when they eventually dug that well so deep that they actually tapped into an underground aquifer where there was a virtually unlimited supply of water. Now, the question that we need to start asking ourselves is this. What are the villagers going to do when they discover that that well is unlimited? That is where I believe we are all sitting right now with regards to the global financial system. The bandits have been protecting that well for so long now and maintaining this illusion of scarcity, and it doesn't have to be that way. Somebody was just telling me just now in the break, Brendan I think, how that but with farming techniques a few handful of people can literally feed millions. These techniques are there. There's no need for all this nonsense. Overpopulation is considered to be a huge problem. Is it really? There's still supposed to be what is it? How many square meters of arable land per person on the earth? Plenty. Not even having to worry about it. There are solutions for everything. And my opinion is that the banking system and how we've been tricked with this credit illusion of the mind is what is ultimately causing the chaos. Now, for me, this is what awakening is about. We're awakening to the literal, the geometry, the left brain, and we're also awakening to the right brain of what this all means. Let me give you an example. We were taught at school that planets revolve around the sun, right?
Yeah.
Now, is that true? Yes, it is true. But is it also fair to say that that's a very incomplete statement? Because it makes an assumption. Well, yes, it makes an assumption that the sun is at the center, but makes the assumption? What's the sun doing? It's not moving. Is the sun moving?
Yes.
Yeah, so what you're actually doing is you're getting a sun that's moving around. You've got planets moving around the sun, but the sun's also moving. So what you're actually getting is not a circular or elliptical orbit of these planets around the sun. What you're getting when you map it out is a waveform. And this is how we're starting to see the system. We're not seeing it just as what it is now in a logical bits and bytes computer system. We're starting to see the effect that it's having as waves on each of the consciousness of everybody around us, on the different people. Whether they're starving, whether they're greedy, whatever it happens to be. Everybody's got their own agenda. And we're starting for the first time ever to see what this is. Why is that happening? I'll leave that for you to speculate. That's not what I'm here today. Again, don't want to talk about whether money is necessary. Do we need in a world without money? What is the purpose of money? Are there alternative solutions? I'm going to start talking about sustainable communities a little bit just at the end, and also want to talk a little bit about alternative currencies. But I can tell you this, they exist, and they are real, and they can work, and they are working. Okay, so to carry on where we've left off, we're now to point 10. This sounds very superficial, but what I'm going to tell you is actually goes even deeper than most people realize. It's actually illegal for banks to claim more than double the amount loaned from any borrower, which is called the in duplum rule. You're familiar with the in duplum rule? You can't charge more than double your interest. Okay, so if you have a loan of R1 million, the banks can't claim more than double of that from you. The in duplum rule. However, banks are not only breaking this rule, but they are also forcing people to pay interest on loans up front. In other words, interest is paid back first before the principal, and this is plainly illegal. and how banks are able to charge interest at all, seeing as no lawful South African rand money was ever lent to the customer in the first place, is a very interesting mystery. Okay, so let's go into this a little bit more detail because there's some interesting clues here. Okay, this in duplum rule and this notion of interest. You're familiar that when you're paying back a loan, you're paying off the interest first. So the first 2 or 3 years of your home loan, you don't pay any principal. In fact, the bill you get after 3 years is bigger than the bill you originally started with. Weird. Now you start asking, well, why do banks do that? Now, what happens is when the banks loan money and you start repaying that, let's not talk about securitization for now. What happens is you're creating money, and when you start repaying it, it eliminates the money. So one adds money to the supply of a loan, adds money to the supply of money. When you repay it back to the bank, it contracts the supply of money. Okay? With me so far. So why do banks want to charge interest up front? It means they get their profits up front. They get all their money earlier rather than later. But it's interesting now because the in duplum rule says that you can't charge all this interest, exorbitant interest on as a basis for your capital amount, original amount. But if no actual money was lent in the first place, how much interest are they legally allowed to charge? Zero. How can they be charging interest on something when they can't even prove that they lent it to you in the first place? Little legal dilemma that the banks have.
Scott, just a little technical thing. Where is that?
Case law.
Just case
Yeah,
law?
no, but if you want cases on it, I'll send it to you.
There's no actual legislation or statute that says it.
No, it isn't the National Credit Act, I think, isn't it?
Sorry,
Let's talk about the
the
National Credit Act.
National Credit Act, as far as I know, says that the interest may not exceed the capital amount.
Yes.
Not what you said, but maybe it's different for what.
Yes, no, you're right. There's 2 points. The one point is exactly what you just mentioned there, the interest exceeding the capital in duplum rule. What I'm referring to now is separate. It's the interest being charged up front. That's not prescribed.
Right.
As far as I know in legislation, they just do it because they can.
But I've got a real example of where Investec actually charge you fees. So it's no longer interest. So they charge you normal interest at prime plus whatever. Then they charge you fees on top of that. And in our case, the fees was more than the actual principal debt. Wow. And then they liquidated the company based on the fact that you hadn't paid their fees back.
Yes.
But fees are effectively a profit share. It's a right. It's actually a right to dividend if the company makes money one day. So what they cleverly do, instead of taking equity in the company, they charge you a fee. But instead of waiting for their profits like other shareholders, they dress it up as a fee and then liquidate you to take the assets.
That's a really, really important. What we're dealing here, he's just, oh goodness gracious, you open a huge can of worms. What he's referring to is this notion of liquidations and sequestrations, something I've been fighting myself through personally. It is extremely interesting because exactly what they do. There's a law in this country called the Insolvency Act that says if you owe more than £50, and I'm not kidding, it says £50. It's so old. We think we're in the new South Africa, and there was an old South Africa. This was before the old South Africa. It was originally 1936, and it hasn't really, it's been amended and a few changes, but it still says if you've got a debt of more than £50, you can be liquidated and sequestrated, which means that a company, and by the way, that equates now to 100 rand. Now, when was the last time that the pound was 2-to-1 to the rand? A long time ago. We're talking about a law that's extremely, where's the progression? Where's the progression? It also happens to be the only industry, the liquidation industry, where that doesn't require BEE. Interesting,
They do
eh?
have it. They do have it.
There was an article now.
They appoint three liquidators, and the third one's always the BE candidate. Who apparently just collects checks.
Yeah, but there's no actual
There's
law.
one liquidator who's the main dude,
Yeah.
and I can tell you who that is in Cape Town, who actually runs the show. And he tells the other two to sit in their corner and keep quiet. They don't sign resolutions, they don't sign off master's documents. And he runs the show and tells them what they can and cannot do. And at the end of it, he unfortunately has to part with some of his commission. Which is, that's another whole story as well. If you look at what's happened with Raoul Levitt, payoffs there, it's another interesting little department.
It's huge. And I mean, there's literally emails from banks and stuff explaining how bad this goes.
While you're talking about this, there's in Noseweek magazine, which I think everybody should subscribe to. I've got no connection other than a long-term subscriber. but I highly recommend it because the articles cover a lot of what we've been talking about today and this week. But they brought up a couple of issues ago how FNB have been charging the interest like you're talking totally illegally and calculating it illegally. And it's generally been for black homeowners.
Yeah.
And in many cases, the people have actually paid off the houses and they've continued to not told them, and the money has rolled in every month because they don't know that, and they're now refusing to pay interest on those overpayments amounting to 10 or 20,000 rands.
Correct. And it gets worse than that because the township, most people who have houses in the township don't have title deeds. Not only do they not have access to them, but for those of you who know about Leon Lowe, they'll tell you there's about 30 different types of title deeds that exist in this country. So everyone thinks there's just one title. He actually said that Verwoerd would have been so proud of the way the ANC government has actually put the South African people into house arrest. That's his statement. So again, it's not really my intention to become politically motivated in these discussions. But what I am saying is he's saying that to make a point that if you go and read the title deeds of people that live in townships, it's basically house arrest. They tell you when you can and can't leave. It's a whole process. I haven't seen those title deeds myself, but Leon Lowe does presentations and speaking events all over the country to try and get people to understand this. It's really, really hectic stuff, and it goes back to that. But it goes back to this insolvency law that says if you owe more than 100 rand, they can basically take everything you've got. And then if they can't find you, they basically do a hostile sequestration or behind your back, and they go and they just start liquidating assets. And when they appoint liquidators, like he said, they strip the company clean. I could tell you some serious stories, and this doesn't involve just a few hundred thousands here and there on poor people. We're talking tens, sometimes hundreds of millions. Huge figures. It was so bad that Carte Blanche had to put a story on this, because that's how deep this goes. And the reason why I'm also bringing this up is it just goes back into this just ridiculous notion of asset stripping based on debt. If we understand what money is, we start to realize the issues, and we realize that there are serious legal flaws in the system, and that the banks are breaking those laws. And we have to get this out into court, and that's precisely what we're doing. Okay, we know that banks are lending out fake money. That's really what it is. But the assets that they foreclose on and the lives they destroy are very real. We actually have a website where we've now got about 2,000 people who actually shared their stories with us on the New Era, New Economic Rights Alliance website, where they can actually go and share stories. They're horrific. Absolutely horrific. Remember, just because numbers appear on a home loan account or credit card statement does not mean that those numbers represent lawful loans. And I think that's the one thing we thought was true. When you go to a bank to borrow money, they must have the money to lend it to you, which means that it must be a legitimate transaction. Therefore, no matter how corrupt the system is, we should do the honourable thing and the right thing and pay it back. Because that's what we were brought up to do. Fortunately, however, we're starting to learn the truth. And in fact, this is starting to come back and bite us, because there are assets just being ripped apart from people. And this is the stuff that we have to stop. The collection process in banks have become so extreme that call centre operators have been known to verbally abuse customers. The customer believes quite wrongly that they are running at a loss, the bank is running at a loss, and is simply doing their best to get the money back. This illusion is maintained by the banks, who continue to refine their well-oiled clinical machine of repossession and foreclosure. Banks are now even resorting to forcefully take money out of people's bank accounts without notice. Did you guys know that? That they take money out of bank accounts. They'll physically take money out of without any notice whatsoever. Here's a little thing from, I think it's SABC News. Yeah.
Credit regulators warn banks not to pursue bad business practices. The banking ombudsman recently received several complaints from customers whose bank accounts have been tampered with. Some banks have come under fire for misappropriating customers' entire salaries, in some instances, to pay debts owed to them.
Gebruikers nie eers kos op hulle tafel het nie, dat hulle 'n man se salaris kan vat en dood eenvoudig dan dis.
Did you hear what he said? Some instances for money that's owed to them. Not for instances where money is owed to them, in some instances. I'm going to go back again, just listen to that, because it just starts to show you what is really going on in these banks in terms of their ability to be able to take money out, even if there isn't a debt or so-called loan.
From customers whose bank accounts have been tampered with. Some banks have come under fire for misappropriating customers' entire salaries, in some instances, to pay debt owed to them.
Gebruikers nie eers kos op hulle tafel het nie, dat hulle 'n man se salaris kan vat en dood eenvoudig dan weet wat die kliënt die bank skuld te delg en dan sit daai man sonder 'n sent. Wat duidelik wat Klaus sê, die probleem is net, Vrydag weet ek van 'n spesifieke persoon, dit was 'n dame wat getroud was, sy's geskei op die oomblik, hulle het skuld aangegaan, haar man het nie werk nie en die bank het dood eenvoudig.
Not in line with general collecting principles per se. However, has been brought to their attention. They have agreed to stop that practice. They have also agreed to refund the people whose entire salary is there.
The Ombudsman has recommended that the banks refund the amounts they deducted and limit themselves to deducting a reasonable amount.
I met with the Bank and they've admitted doing it. We've agreed that they will stop doing it. We've agreed that they will refund the money to the customers from whom they've taken it. And thirdly, we've agreed that they will, in future, deduct small or nominal amounts. But there's some requirements for common set-off. And I'm not convinced that the banks are entitled to apply a common law set-off as they claim.
The banks are acting in terms of what is called